The dust hadn't settled from the transport vehicle when Sergeant Michael Torres stepped onto the cracked pavement of Pine Valley. After 18 months deployed overseas, everything looked smaller than he remembered. The mountains in the distance seemed closer, the main street narrower, and the house at the end of Maple Street where his 7-year-old daughter Emma waited felt like it belonged to someone else's memory. Michael adjusted the worn strap of his military duffel bag and started walking. No one knew he was coming home early. The mission had ended 3 weeks ahead of schedule, and he'd caught the first transport back to the States. He wanted to surprise Emma, to see that bright smile that had carried him through the darkest nights in hostile territory. The house looked different. The white picket fence needed repair, paint peeling in long strips like old scars. The garden his late wife Sarah had tended so carefully was overgrown with weeds. Michael's chest tightened as he approached the front door. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't pinpoint what. He knocked 3 times, the sound echoing in the afternoon stillness. Footsteps approached from inside, slow and measured. The door opened to reveal Rebecca Martinez, the woman who had agreed to care for Emma while he was deployed. She was Sarah's cousin, someone he'd trusted completely. "Michael," Rebecca's face showed genuine shock. "You're early. We weren't expecting you." Caught an early flight. Wanted to surprise Emma. Michael smiled, though something in Rebecca's expression made his stomach clench. "Is she here?" "She's resting, in her room." Rebecca stepped aside reluctantly. "She's been feeling under the weather lately." Michael entered the house, immediately noticing the stale air and drawn curtains. The living room was darker than he remembered, and there was an odd smell, medicinal, like disinfectant mixed with something else he couldn't identify. "What kind of illness?" Michael asked, his protective instincts sharpening. "Just fatigue, loss of appetite. The doctor said it might be stress from you being away." Rebecca's voice was steady, but she avoided eye contact. Michael nodded, though something felt off about her explanation. "I'd like to see her." "Of course. She's upstairs, second door on the right." He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his heart racing with anticipation. Emma's door was slightly ajar, and he could see a small figure curled up under a thin blanket. Michael pushed the door open gently. "Emma, sweetheart?" The little girl turned toward his voice, and Michael's breath caught in his throat. Emma looked thin, too thin. Her usually bright eyes were dulled, surrounded by dark circles. Most disturbing were the small, circular marks on her arms and neck, like tiny puncture wounds that hadn't healed properly. "Daddy?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. She didn't leap up to hug him as he'd imagined. Instead, she seemed to shrink back against her pillow. Michael knelt beside the bed, his trained eye cataloging every detail. The marks on her skin, her pale complexion, the way she flinched when he reached out to touch her forehead. "What happened to your arm, sweetheart?" Emma glanced toward the door, then back at him. "I've been having bad dreams about the tiny monsters under my bed." "Monsters?" Michael kept his voice gentle, though alarm bells were ringing in his head. "They come out at night. They whisper things and they bite." Emma's small hand touched one of the marks on her arm. "Rebecca says they're not real, but I feel them." Michael examined the marks more closely. They weren't random insect bites. They were too uniform, too precisely placed. And there was something else. A faint, sweet smell emanating from Emma's skin that he didn't recognize. "Has anyone else been taking care of you? Any doctors or nurses?" Emma shook her head. "Just Rebecca. And sometimes Dr. Mitchell comes by, but he only comes at night, and he tells me to sleep while he talks to Rebecca." Michael's military training kicked in. Something was very wrong here, and every instinct told him his daughter was in danger. He forced himself to remain calm, not wanting to frighten Emma further. "I'm home now, sweetheart. Daddy's here, and I'm going to make sure you're safe." He tucked the blanket around her. "Try to get some rest. I'm going to talk to Rebecca." Michael found Rebecca in the kitchen, washing dishes with unnecessary vigor. She didn't look up when he entered. "She looks sick, Rebecca. Really sick. What's been going on here? I told you she's been under the weather." "Children get ill sometimes, Michael. It's nothing serious." "Those marks on her arms, what are they from?" Rebecca's hands stilled for a moment. "Mosquito bites. She's always been sensitive to insect bites." Michael studied her profile. He'd interrogated enough people to know when someone was lying. In winter? In a house with screens on all the windows? "Look, Michael, I've been taking care of Emma for over a year. I think I know what's best for her." Rebecca's voice had an edge now. "You can't just walk in here and start questioning everything. I'm her father. Questioning everything is exactly what I'm going to do." That night, Michael slept in the guest room down the hall from Emma's bedroom. He left his door open and stayed alert, listening for any unusual sounds. Around midnight, he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Through the crack in his door, he saw a figure enter Emma's room. It was Rebecca, carrying what looked like a small medical bag. Michael waited, every muscle tense, as she disappeared into Emma's room. 15 minutes later, she emerged and went back downstairs. Michael crept to Emma's door and peered inside. His daughter was sleeping, but there was a fresh mark on her arm, a tiny puncture wound with a small drop of blood. The next morning, while Rebecca was out shopping, Michael searched Emma's room thoroughly. Under her mattress, he found a collection of small glass vials filled with a dark red substance. Each vial was labeled with dates going back 6 months. His blood turned to ice as he realized what he was looking at. Someone had been systematically extracting blood from his daughter. Michael photographed everything, then carefully replaced the vials. He needed more evidence before he could act. In Rebecca's room, he found medical equipment hidden in her closet, syringes, tourniquets, and a centrifuge. There was also a stack of cash and what appeared to be payment receipts. His hands shook as he photographed the evidence. Rebecca wasn't just neglecting Emma. She was selling her daughter's blood. That afternoon, Michael called his former commanding officer, Colonel Hayes, who had connections in federal law enforcement. Within hours, an FBI team was en route to Pine Valley. "We've been tracking a black market blood ring for months," Agent Sarah Chen explained over the phone. "Children's blood is particularly valuable for certain illegal medical procedures. Your daughter may not be the only victim." The sting operation was set for that evening. Michael would wear a wire and confront Rebecca while federal agents surrounded the house. But as evening approached, Emma's condition worsened. She developed a fever and began having difficulty breathing. "We need to get her to a hospital," Michael told the agents. "Not yet," Agent Chen replied. "We need to catch them in the act, or Rebecca will just disappear and start over somewhere else." Michael's protective instincts warred with his desire for justice. Finally, he made his decision. "I'm taking my daughter to safety. You can handle Rebecca without us." As he carried Emma to his car, Rebecca returned from her errands. She saw the federal agents emerging from their hiding spots and tried to run, but it was too late. At the hospital, doctors confirmed Michael's worst fears. Emma was severely anemic and showed signs of chronic blood loss. She would need weeks of treatment to recover fully. "Your daughter is lucky," Dr. Williams told him. "Another few weeks of this abuse, and the damage might have been permanent." Rebecca was arrested along with Dr. Mitchell and 2 other accomplices. The investigation revealed a network that had been exploiting vulnerable children across 3 states. Emma's blood, due to her rare blood type, had been particularly valuable on the black market. During Rebecca's trial, the full scope of her betrayal came to light. She had been paid thousands of dollars for Emma's blood while claiming to care for her out of family loyalty. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison. 3 months later, Michael and Emma moved to a new town where no one knew their story. Emma was healthier now, though she still had nightmares about the tiny monsters who had hurt her. Michael had left the military to focus on her recovery and started working as a security consultant. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home, Emma looked up at him with eyes that were bright again. "Daddy, why did Rebecca hurt me?" Michael had dreaded this question, but he'd prepared an honest answer. "Some people do bad things because they want money more than they want to help others. But that doesn't mean everyone is like that. Most people are good. Will you stay with me now? Forever," Michael promised. "I'm never leaving you again." Emma smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since his return. "Good, because I like having my daddy home." As the sun set over their new neighborhood, Michael held his daughter close and felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The nightmare was over, and they could finally begin to heal. The case had far-reaching consequences. Michael's evidence helped federal authorities shut down the entire blood trafficking network and rescue dozens of other children. He received commendations from multiple agencies, but the only recognition that mattered to him was Emma's laughter, which had finally returned to their home. Years later, Michael would write a book about their experience, not for fame or money, but to help other parents recognize the signs of abuse and exploitation. The book became a bestseller, with all proceeds going to organizations that protect vulnerable children. Emma grew up to become a pediatric nurse, inspired by her own experience to help other children heal from trauma. She often spoke at conferences about childhood abuse, always crediting her father's courage for saving not just her life, but her future. The tiny monsters that had once whispered to her in the dark were replaced by the strong, protective voice of a father who had kept his promise to never leave her again. And in the end, that was the only voice that mattered. Michael Torres never considered himself a hero. He was simply a father who had recognized that his most important mission wasn't overseas fighting enemies in foreign lands. It was at home, protecting the one person who meant more to him than life itself. The scars from that dark time would always remain, but they had healed into something stronger, an unbreakable bond between a father and daughter who had survived the worst and found their way back to the light together. In the quiet moments before sleep, when Emma would sometimes still reach for his hand across the space between their beds during thunderstorms, Michael would remember why he had fought so hard to save her. Not because she was his daughter, but because she was a child who deserved to grow up safe, loved, and free from the monsters that hide in the shadows. And every morning when she woke up with a smile, he knew that the fight had been worth it. The investigation into the blood trafficking network uncovered a web of corruption that reached further than anyone had initially imagined. Dr. Mitchell, it turned out, was not the mastermind, but merely a middleman in an operation that spanned multiple countries. The blood extracted from children like Emma was being sold to wealthy clients who believed it had anti-aging properties, a modern form of vampirism disguised as medical treatment. Agent Chen kept Michael updated on the progress of the case. "Your daughter's blood type is O negative," she explained during one of their meetings. "But more than that, she has an extremely rare combination of antibodies that made her blood incredibly valuable. They were essentially farming her." The word farming hit Michael like a physical blow. His little girl had been treated like livestock, her life reduced to a commodity. The rage that surged through him was white-hot, but he channeled it into something productive, helping the FBI identify other victims. Emma's medical records combined with Rebecca's financial transactions led investigators to a network of corrupt caregivers, foster parents, and even some orphanages that had been systematically exploiting children. The operation had been running for nearly 5 years, generating millions of dollars in illegal profits. "We've identified at least 43 victims," Agent Chen told Michael during a briefing 6 months after Emma's rescue, some as young as 3 years old. "Your decision to come forward saved not just Emma, but dozens of other children." The trial became a media sensation, though Michael did everything possible to keep Emma's identity protected. She was referred to only as Victim A in court documents, and her testimony was given via closed-circuit television from a secure location. Watching his daughter recount her ordeal was one of the hardest things Michael had ever endured. Emma, now 8 years old and much healthier, spoke with a clarity that broke the heart of everyone in the courtroom. "I thought the monsters were real," she said, her small voice carrying through the speakers. "But they weren't monsters. They were people who were supposed to take care of me." The defense attorney tried to argue that Rebecca had been manipulated by Dr. Mitchell, that she was as much a victim as the children. But Michael's evidence, the hidden vials, the medical equipment, the payment records, painted a clear picture of willing participation in a horrific crime. Rebecca was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Dr. Mitchell received life without parole. The other conspirators received sentences ranging from 10 to 15 years. But for Michael, the legal victory felt hollow. No amount of punishment could undo what had been done to Emma or to the other children who had suffered. The real work was in healing, and that would take years. Emma's recovery was slow but steady. The physical effects of chronic blood loss had left her weak and prone to illness, but with proper medical care and nutrition, her strength gradually returned. The psychological trauma was more complex. She suffered from nightmares, anxiety, and periods of depression that required ongoing therapy. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery, worked with Emma twice a week. "Children are remarkably resilient," she told Michael during one of their sessions. "But Emma will carry this experience with her for life." The key is helping her understand that what happened to her doesn't define who she is. Michael threw himself into Emma's care with the same intensity he had once brought to military operations. He learned everything he could about childhood trauma, nutrition, and holistic healing. He read books on art therapy, music therapy, and play therapy. He became an expert in recognizing the signs of PTSD in children. Their new home in Millfield was chosen specifically for its healing environment. It was a small town surrounded by mountains and forests, with clean air and a strong sense of community. Michael bought a house with a large garden where Emma could plant flowers and vegetables, giving her a sense of control and growth. The first time Emma laughed, really laughed, was 4 months after they moved to Millfield. She was chasing fireflies in their backyard on a warm summer evening, her blonde hair catching the last rays of sunlight. The sound was like music to Michael's ears, a sign that the little girl he remembered was still there, fighting to emerge from the shadow of her trauma. School was another challenge. Emma had missed months of education due to her illness, and she struggled with concentration and social interaction. Michael worked closely with her teachers to develop an individualized education plan that accommodated her needs while challenging her to grow. Mrs. Jennifer Walsh, Emma's third-grade teacher, became an unexpected ally. She had experience working with traumatized children and understood the delicate balance between pushing Emma forward and allowing her to heal at her own pace. Emma is incredibly intelligent, Mrs. Walsh told Michael during a parent-teacher conference. Once she feels safe and secure, I think she'll excel academically. But right now, her brain is still in survival mode. We need to be patient. Patience was something Michael had learned in the military, but this was different. In combat, patience was a tactical tool. Here it was an act of love, allowing Emma to set the pace of her own recovery without trying to rush her back to normalcy. The nightmares were the worst part. Emma would wake up screaming, convinced that the monsters were coming for her again. Michael would sit with her for hours, reading stories or singing the lullabies Sarah used to sing. Sometimes they would just sit in silence. Emma curled up against his chest while he stroked her hair. "Daddy, why did Rebecca hurt me?" Emma asked one night after a particularly bad nightmare. It was a question she had asked many times before, but Michael knew she needed to hear the answer again and again until it finally made sense to her young mind. "Some people are sick in ways we can't see," he explained gently. "They make bad choices because they care more about money than about people. But that sickness isn't your fault, and it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. Will I be sick like her when I grow up? No, sweetheart. What happened to you made you stronger, not sicker. You survived something terrible, and that means you have a special kind of strength inside you." Emma seemed to consider this. Like a superhero. Exactly like a superhero. But even superheroes need time to heal when they get hurt. These conversations became the foundation of Emma's healing. Michael helped her understand that she was not broken, not damaged goods, but a survivor with her own unique strength. He encouraged her to express her feelings through art, creating a dedicated space in their home where she could paint, draw, or sculpt without judgment. Emma's artwork during this period was telling. Early pieces were dark, filled with shadowy figures and red splashes that clearly represented her trauma. But gradually, her art began to include more light, more color, more hope. Flowers began to appear in her paintings, then trees, then animals, and finally people with smiling faces. Michael documented this progression, not as evidence of recovery, but as a celebration of his daughter's resilience. Each new painting was hung in their home like a trophy, a visual reminder of how far they had come. The first anniversary of Emma's rescue was marked by a small celebration, just the two of them, sharing Emma's favorite meal and watching her favorite movie. It wasn't a celebration of trauma, but of survival, of the day their real life together had begun.
"Daddy," Emma said as they sat on their porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "I'm glad you came home. I'm glad I came home too, sweetheart, and I'm never leaving again. Promise? Promise?"
It was a promise Michael had made many times before, but each time he said it, he meant it more deeply. His military career had ended when Emma needed him most, and he had no regrets about that choice. Being her father was the most important mission he would ever have. As Emma's 9th birthday approached, Michael began planning something special. Not just a party, but a celebration of how much she had grown. He invited her new friends from school, their neighbors, and Mrs. Walsh. It was the first time since the trauma that Emma had been comfortable having a group of people in their home. The party was a success. Emma laughed and played games with her friends, blew out her candles with genuine joy, and even gave a small speech thanking everyone for being her friends. Watching her that day, Michael felt a deep sense of pride and gratitude. His daughter was not just surviving, she was thriving. That night, as Michael tucked Emma into bed, she handed him a drawing she had made that day. It showed a man in military uniform holding hands with a little girl. Above them she had written in careful letters, "My daddy, my hero." "You don't have to be a hero, Daddy," Emma said sleepily. "You just have to be my dad." Michael felt tears well up in his eyes. Being your dad is the best job I've ever had. The real monsters, Michael had learned, weren't the imaginary creatures that haunted children's dreams. They were the adults who betrayed the trust placed in them, who saw vulnerable children as opportunities rather than precious lives to protect. But there were also heroes in the world, not the kind who wore capes or had superpowers, but ordinary people who chose to stand up for those who couldn't protect themselves. Sometimes those heroes wore military uniforms, sometimes scrubs or business suits, and sometimes they were simply parents who refused to let anything harm their children. Michael Torres was one of those heroes, though he would never see himself that way. To him, he had simply done what any father would do. He had brought his daughter home. Years later, when Emma was in high school and considering her future career, she would tell her father that she wanted to work with children who had experienced trauma. "I want to help them the way you helped me," she said. Michael smiled, seeing in her eyes the same determination that had carried him through the darkest days of their journey together. "You'll make a wonderful advocate for children, Emma. You understand their pain because you've been there." "And I understand their strength too," Emma replied, "because you taught me that surviving doesn't make you weak, it makes you powerful." In that moment, Michael knew that everything they had endured together had meaning. Emma's suffering had not been in vain if it led her to help other children find their way back to the light. The tiny monsters that had once whispered to her in the dark were now just memories, no longer threatening, but serving as reminders of how far they had traveled together. And in their place was something much stronger, the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter who had faced the worst the world could offer and emerged victorious, not because they were perfect, but because they refused to give up on each other. That, Michael realized, was the most important lesson of all, that love, real love, doesn't abandon ship when the waters get rough. It stays, it fights, and it finds a way to bring everyone safely home.